Hello and welcome to another Key Smash Studios video. Today we're going to be talking about shaders in the Unreal Engine. We'll start small and eventually work up towards larger shaders. In this episode, I'll show you some examples of materials and start with the two most basic types of materials and shaders in the Unreal Engine. And from there, we'll progress into the more advanced shaders as weeks go by. So I'll first just talk about what the difference between a shader and a material is. A material is what you put on an object. So something like this box here. This box here has something to go in between the wireframe mesh that the object is created in the engine. So in the terms of the engine has several vertices around it, and it creates faces from those vertices, and then it colors those faces with a material. That material can be edited via a shader, and that shader can do things like animate itself or change colors or change context based on the game that you're in. Or it can just have a standard UV attached to it, something like that says, hey, I want this instead of being a gray face right here, I want this face to be purple or something like that. So let's hop into some examples of materials. If you watched my video last week, you'll know that I made a material on this landscape. It's a low poly landscape. I'm just using that same project for this material series as well. But this landscape material is actually technically a shader. It's a shader that is used across the entire landscape. Now, if we want to create a shader or a material or anything like that, the first thing that we need to do is right-click onto our content browser, and we're going to come right here to where it says Create Basic Asset Material. So we can name that whatever we want. The typical naming scheme is that you put the name of the model that it's going to attach to underscore material. When you create the material, you just double click on it. It opens up this new window, and I'll go over what a lot of this is. This is the base material in a node editor. This node editor is going to allow us to create a shader for this material. The things that we primarily worry about in games is our base color and our normal, though we may end up messing with the rest of these. Today, we're just going to mess with base color and metallic, specular, and roughness. Normal maps are a little bit more complicated, and we'll hop into that next week. So the first thing that you need to know about how nodes work is that there's two ways to place nodes. You can click and drag off of an existing circle here, and it'll let you create a node here. So let's say we want to have a constant there. It doesn't make much sense to have a constant there, but you can just type in and create a node. Additionally, you can right-click and create a node. So this will make much more sense for us. Let's create a constant 3-vector. Constant 3 vectors are pretty cool in low poly landscapes because they keep track of 3 constants. And when we keep track of 3 constants, we can keep track of the RGB values of a color per se. So right here we have our RGB values. If you want to change them manually, you can, or you can click on this constant thing and just change the value of the color wheel. So I am making this on a sort of dead tree type feel. So maybe something in like this range would be good for me. And this is just a dark brown. So the first thing that you do when you create a simple material like this, so we're just creating a material to go on an FBX that has already been imported. And we're just going to connect that dark brown to our base color. And we'll see that in our circle on the left here, we've just got a dark brown here. But you'll see that it's a little bit shiny. And one of the ways we can sort of combat that shininess is we can pull our metallic off. And since this is going to be a tree, we don't really want it to be that metallic. So we're going to create a regular constant this time. This will give us a value of anything that we want. Primarily between 0 and 1 is what you're going to use these for. And I'm just going to put this at 0.1. And what that's going to say is I'm only 10% metallic. Maybe you want to put this to 0. It's really a judgment type situation for you. Same with specular. This is also a judgment. It depends on the depends on the object that you're doing. 0 means it won't reflect any light, so specular comes in and reflects off the object. 1 means that it will reflect all of the specular light. So we don't really want 0. That looks kind of muted, right? It's very just plain, but maybe 0.15 gives us a little bit of reflection that we might expect to see, but not so much that it looks shiny. And roughness is of a similar factor. We're also going to use a constant here. If we make roughness 0, it becomes super shiny. It's almost like a marble. But if we make roughness closer to 1, so in this case, we want to emulate sort of it being a tree, we sort of take away a little bit of the luster of it, but also make it a little more rugged. So we have this very basic material. We're just sort of creating a brown that is the type of brown that we want to be on a tree. I can select this tree base. Let's open this up. I'll pull this to the side for a second. I'm going to select this tree base and then come back here to this window, and I can hit set preview based on current content browser selection. So then instead of the circle, we're going to do the tree base that we've been looking at. So imagine in a low poly game this tree sort of being dead in between other trees. It feels to me like it might work pretty well as a low poly material. It's a pretty simple material to set up, but again, we need to start somewhere. Now I want to show that while this seems simple, it does end up adding up to things. So I'm going to go over a couple different examples of just sort of tiers of these materials. So last week we worked on a landscape material, which again, see, we have something similar here. We have a little bit more complex thing going into base color, but we also have metallic specular roughness here, so stepped learning, right? And we also have the normal, which we're going to talk more about next week in depth, but for this week, we're not going to mess with this, but that was just for an effect last week. If we go a little bit further, we can animate and do all sorts of crazy things with our materials and shaders. So this shader is supposed to simulate water being on a material. So you can imagine this being on like a plane. If I swap this to a plane, you can sort of imagine this being put into a landscape, maybe like the top of a pool or something like that. And, if you have watched the Arc dev kit series that I've done, if I can find it, I'll throw up a clip of the most recent landscape shader that I've been working on. Some of these textured node trees get truly massive. So, just bear in mind, we're starting out small, but the point is we start small, something like this, so we can get to a point where we can come and make something like this. So that's one of our 2 most basic forms of shaders in Unreal. So let's go ahead and do the second one here. So I'm going to drag this down, and I have this log cabin material. Again, this is a blank material, and I'm just going to click and drag this texture in, and I'll get to why in just a second. So here we have same basic thing. We have a base color, all that jazz. This texture that I've made is just an image. It is a brown with some logins on the side of it. And it is specific to an individual model, specifically this model right here. If you look, this model I made for a game that we're no longer doing, but it is just a model of a bunch of, I guess, cylinders stacked on their side. And it's supposed to be a modular part of a log cabin. So I specifically made this UV to match up with this individual FBX. If you'd like to see a video on how I did that, let me know in the comments down below and I can throw that together. But in terms of this shader, our best thing we want to do is we want to have a texture sample. If you didn't click and drag, you can also come here and type in texture sample, and you can create the same thing, and you can select the texture sample here. It does the same thing when you click and drag. It does that for you automatically. Just like before, we want to take our RGB value, connect it to our base color, and we'll see that the changes happen up here. So again, we're going to mess around with our roughness, specular, and metallic just to get this a little bit closer to the feeling of what what we kind of want it to look like in the game. So we'll create 3 constants here. And by the way, if you ever make a mistake and you want to change something about what you did, you can just hold down Alt and click on a line and it breaks the line. Or you can come right here, select this node and hit delete if you want to delete the whole node. So we have 3 constants here. Maybe, just maybe I can line them up. All right, so we have our 3 constants here. The first one I want to do is our roughness. I want to go ahead and put that at 0.9. Just like before, we're dealing with sort of a wood instance. I kind of want that to be closer to the 1 than it is to the 0. Because if I break specular and metallic and it's just rough, close to 0, it'll be really shiny. So specular, I do want it to give off some reflected light. If it's 0, it will look very bland and very matte, and I don't really want that. Again, that's a bit of a judgment call, but you do want it to give off some sheen. Even things that we see in the real world, like if I look down at a computer desk that's made of wood, it does still give off a little bit of sheen of specular light. And again, 0 on metallic. I'm fine with 0 on metallic. This is made of wood. It's not metallic at all. So let's go ahead and save that. And I'm going to go back just like we did before. And I'm going to select this in our content browser, come back in here, and we can view it as we intended. And we'll see that the UV matches up with the model. So we have essentially what would be a modular side of a log cabin in a sort of low poly game. And this material feels pretty nice to me. Obviously, if we had normals and maybe a height map, this would be a little bit more detailed, but given that this is supposed to be sort of a starter material, this is a pretty good start for us. So I'm pretty happy with both these materials. Let's just make sure we can drag them into the game and do what we want to do with them. So here is our log cabin base, and here is our tree base, and that tree is truly massive. But, you know, that's what scaling's for. That's a little bit better. And I'm just going to scale this down a little bit as well. And all we need to do to attach these materials to these, just like in Unity or Godot, you just click and drag the material onto the individual assets. Or you can go to the individual assets. So let's say on Treebase, we hadn't selected one yet. Let's say we hadn't selected one yet on the thing. We can just come down here to the materials. We select it up here, come down here to the materials, and then we can search for our tree base. So if we go into play and we run around, we'll see that we have this side material. This looks maybe a smidgen dark. I might, if I were to go back and redo that UV, I might touch up the colors just a little bit. And the same with this tree. This tree is a little dark, so maybe we can go back into our material and change this color just a smidgen to be a little bit brighter. And since it's already in the world, when we save this, the shader gets updated in the world, and we'll see that reflected on the tree. So now we come to the tree. The tree is a little bit brighter. And part of that being a little dark is that I have not built the lighting. There you have it. There's the 2 most simple ways to create shaders in your game. As we go, we'll get a little more complex. Each week we'll do a new shader and jump into some things that are pretty cool, like animation and things of that nature. If you have any questions, please, of course, let me know down below. I'm always more than happy to help. If you haven't already, check the link in the description below for our Discord. Lots of cool people in there, plus we stream on Twitch. You'll find a link for that in the description below as well. If you are interested, we have an asset store pack up on the Unity Asset Store, as well as having a game up on the Google Play Store. You'll find links for those in the description as well. I hope this has been helpful. Please let us know if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, and hopefully we'll see you next week.